Hi everyone, my name's Klara Kalocsay and I'm the Head of Research Strategy at Food Frontier. Welcome to this session, Charting the Course, Plant-Based Meat Industry Insights. We know the past few years have been hard for every single sector, with rising inflation and cost of living pressures. We know it's been a hard couple of years in particular for the plant-based meat world. With today's news headlines driven and dominated by US outlets, there seems to be an almost constant media noise about one plant-based meat company's share price and predictions of a global decline of meat alternatives. So it's hard to get a clear picture of what's going on in our market and plan accordingly. In this session, I'll be sharing with you the latest industry data from Food Frontier's State of the Industry report. I'll speak about what's changed from financial year 2020, which is the last time we released a State of the Industry report, to financial year 2023, and take a look at where the industry could be in 10 years' time. And then for some outside perspective, I'll be joined by Menezes, who is the co-founder of plant-based meat brand TiNDLE, to discuss his views and perspectives on the current market. Andre is based in Brazil and is joining us online because he's just welcomed his first child, so we appreciate his willingness to join remotely regardless. Oh, where's the clicker? So we heard in the earlier sessions that we need to be speaking about the economic potential of alternative proteins, in addition to the public health and the environmental benefits that they offer. Well, I'm pleased to say that Food Frontier is talking about this. Here's my prop. If we didn't talk about it, a lot of the decision makers that we are trying to speak to wouldn't be interested in hearing from us. Earlier this year, we released our most recent State of the Industry report on the plant-based meat market in Australia. This report is the only source of market data on the Australian plant-based meat industry. And I want to take the opportunity now, when I can see that a lot of you are here in the room with us, to personally thank all of the industry participants who gave their time to help inform the report, so making sure that we can deliver to you the most accurate insights possible. Now, since I'm sure most of you here have already read the report cover to cover, you'll know that this 10-minute presentation can only cover a fraction of what's in the report, and there is a huge amount in there. So I want to recommend that the few of you that haven't yet read it, jump onto our website, where you can download your copy of the report for free, and you can also download your very own copy of our other previous reports and publications. Let's jump into the data. The plant-based meat industry is experiencing overall total sales growth, but it's uneven success across retail and food service sectors. Although retail sales are currently still higher than wholesale food service sales, we expect that to actually change in coming years, as the report found that category growth was largely being driven by wholesale food service sales, which experienced a 59% compound annual growth rate since FY20. In terms of retail sales, there was a contraction of 1% year on year since FY20. I need to contextualise that point. A 3% total contraction in retail sales is actually a much stronger result than what has been seen in other international markets, such as the US, which saw a 12% decline in plant-based meat in retail in 2023 alone. To caveat, our figures go up to FY23, and we don't know what the figures beyond that hold. But what it demonstrates for that year is that the Australian plant-based meat industry was charting its own course and not necessarily mirroring the US market. What we do know is that consumer uptake has been slower than expected, and that many companies are doing it tough at the moment. Despite that, since FY20, plant-based meat sales have increased a total of 47% in Australia, which does signal the long-term growth prospects for the industry. In terms of consumption and production, for annual per capita consumption of plant-based meat, it increased 28% in total since the last time we checked the market. For plant-based meat products on shelves in retail, 63% were made by Australian brands. Now, we know that price is a key barrier for increased consumer consumption, and that plant-based meat products are generally more expensive than conventional counterparts. Our price analysis found that the price premium for plant-based meat products has reduced from 49% to 33%. We also found that per kilo, Australian-made plant-based meat products were on average 15% lower than imported products, and we explore reasons for that in the report. Let's stay on costs. Food Frontier product and price tracking of retail products found that as a category, plant-based meat products increased an average of 7.4% from December 2021 to December 2023. Average prices of conventional meat increased around 8% in the same time period, so relatively on par with one another. Whilst some formats of plant-based meat did experience significant price increases across the 2-year period, and I have a full graph on this in the report, at the same time, some formats like sausages, or some formats like beef style strips and chunks actually experienced average price reductions of 10% and 5.3% respectively. What we found was that many Australian plant-based meat producers were making concerted efforts to avoid price increases and instead aimed to lower the cost of products, with minced products in particular being a primary focus due to its familiarity to consumers and its versatility across multiple cuisines. It's a smart strategy to gain consumers, as mince is like the gateway product of plant-based meats. Everyone knows how to cook a mince recipe, and it's great in bolognese to burritos to sanchoy bao. I mentioned earlier that food service is the biggest area for growth in plant-based meat in Australia. And today we have a whole session exploring the food service opportunity in this room just after lunch. So I won't spend too much time on this point, other than just to say that the food service sector does represent a major opportunity for the plant-based meat industry, and make sure you come back after lunch to hear more. Let's look to the future. In 2019, we asked Deloitte to project the plant-based meat market size in Australia out to 2030. Deloitte offered 3 potential scenarios for the future of the plant-based meat market in Australia. The first scenario predicted $1.4 billion in consumer expenditure. Scenario 2 predicted $2.9 billion, and Scenario 3, $4.6 billion. With the benefit of hindsight, that seems high. But you need to remember that in 2019, the last major pandemic was the Spanish flu. The GFC was a distant memory. Interest rates were low, interest in addressing climate change was high, and there was a lot of consumer excitement and investor hype in the category at the time. For this report, we asked Deloitte to check in on how the industry is tracking on the projections they made in 2019. And given these projections were made pre-COVID, pre-Ukraine war, pre-cost of living crisis, pre-everything above, we asked them to recalculate new 10-year projections out to 2033. Looking at the previous 2030 scenarios, Deloitte compared the FY23 growth rates to the growth rates that would have been required to reach each of the 2030 scenarios, and you can see that in the bottom table. And they found that the plant-based meat industry was only on track to meet a few of these. I mentioned earlier the slower than expected consumer uptake. One measure of this is consumer expenditure on plant-based meat products. We can see that in terms of consumer expenditure, we would have been looking for around 23 to 38% annual growth rate in order to meet scenario 1, 2, or 3. And in 2023, the growth rate was 5% lower than where it needed to be. Now, I cannot overstate enough the impact of the cost of living crisis on inhibiting consumer uptake of plant-based meat. It is really awful timing. Consumers have far less money than they had in 2019. And when budgets tighten, research shows that discretionary spending in grocery shopping takes a major hit. Consumers are only willing or able to spend on the essentials. And at the moment, too many consumers consider plant-based meat a luxury or a nice to have, but not a must-have regular purchase. Other things influence consumer uptake certainly, such as taste, availability, health perceptions, and more. Consumer uptake, as we keep hearing, and willingness to change behaviour is a really nuanced issue, and I look forward to bringing in Andre's views on this shortly. So taking into account all the macroeconomic factors, for the new 10-year projections out to 2033, Deloitte has scaled back the scenarios. In the central scenario, Scenario 2, we are now forecasting consumer expenditure of $1.65 billion by 2033. Scenario 1 is if we currently continue on a business-as-usual pathway. That is the settings that we have right now. the industry continues to receive low levels of government support. There is little public or private investment in R&D or enabling infrastructure. We continue to rely on imported products and ingredients. Retail margins continue to be high, and there is minimal collective work done by industry to address demand-side drivers. Scenario 2 would occur if we see development of a plant-based ingredient supply chain in Australia, some government investment in R&D and infrastructure, and also government support for the sector in terms of supportive messaging and policy priorities. Collaboration from industry on category-wide marketing initiatives, and a reduction in retail margins to lower the prices for consumers. Scenario 3 would see increases or improvements to all of the above, as well as an improvement in the macroeconomic conditions and supercharged industry collaboration, both within the plant-based meat category and across the wider agri-food system. Plant-based meat alternatives will be able to move from being a luxury purchase to being a regular meal choice for more and more Australians. So how do we get there? On screen now are the key takeaways for plant-based meat manufacturers that were surfaced by our consultations with industry. These are only short highlights, and in fact we have an entire chapter in the report dedicated to the path forward, with key takeaways for many sectors, such as government, agriculture, investors, retailers, and more. So if you were in one of those sectors and you would like to see what our takeaways are for you and our recommendations, please make sure you download a copy of the report and at least read that chapter. It's also going to take more than just these takeaways. And to discuss this with me now, I'm going to welcome my guest for this session, Andre Menezes, who is the co-founder of TiNDLE, and I will reposition myself for this virtual fireside chat. Hello, is that on? Okay, cool. Hi, Andre. Thank you for joining us.
I hope you can hear me well. My pleasure. I'm honored to be here with you. Unfortunately, you're not in person this time.
Regardless. To begin with, Andre, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was born in Brazil, and I started my career. I'm an engineer, actually, and I started my career in investment. Nothing to do with food, nothing to do with meat, nothing to do with food tech or plant-based foods. But as I started my career in investment, I ended up joining the world's largest poultry exporter, and I learned everything from A to Z in that value chain of the meat industry. And as an engineer who worked in investment and really learned everything from inside out, I realized how inefficient it was. So after that journey, working in the meat industry, then I started to look for an alternative, which is when I got to know Impossible, Beyond, and many other brands, which led me later to founding TiNDLE back in 2020. And I'm more than happy to share more with you.
Yeah, Andre, for those in the room who haven't heard of TiNDLE, can you please tell us a bit about the brand and what you achieved at the company?
Sure. TiNDLE was, the company started in April 2020, which was a very interesting year to start a business out of Singapore. And our goal was to really very quickly address a very pressing market need that we were seeing at the time. If you recall what was happening back then, everything you said about the excitement of the category, and obviously all the things we know about how important and promising it is, and it still is, we have created a business that was designed to scale quickly globally and to then challenge the most consumed meat in the world, chicken. So we started with a product that for us had to deliver on everything everyone loved about chicken: the fiber, the taste, the smell, everything about it, applications, so we could scale up then globally. And we focus on having a scalable, profitable business model in which the products we would do would be desirable, would be delicious, and would be produced and distributed globally. That company, within that journey of 4 years, we have raised $130 million in total in a few rounds. We have actually managed to open the market in the US, in the UK, in Europe, and we also had as a starting point Singapore. It was a very successful journey. We started with food services. Later, we entered retail, and the company is still running. My co-founder is running it right now. I'm still a shareholder, and cheering for the company and for the category every day.
Thanks so much, Andre. Now, it's clear, it's a theme from today that the growth of plant-based meat, it's slower than expected, and one of the big reasons of that is behavioural economics and consumer behaviour, and it's a super hard nut to crack. And earlier this year, Andre, you wrote an opinion piece in Green Queen, which I recommend everyone here takes time to read tomorrow because it's really awesome. And you said that one thing that's become clear in hindsight is that consumer adoption is more nuanced than initially presumed. I'd love for you to share more about your perspective on that, leaning on what you've been experiencing for the audience.
First of all, shout out to Sonali. I know she's there. And thank you for publishing the article. I hope it was helpful. Got a lot of feedback from a lot of people thanking, just sending a thank you note for the report. So thank you, Sonali, for making it happen. And I'm glad it was useful to some. So yes, Klara, the starting point back then, obviously we're in a scenario of very quick growth of the category, and the reasons why that growth was happening seemed extremely compelling. We all know that it's a more sustainable, more efficient way to produce high quality protein that in turn would help us fighting climate change, water scarcity, land scarcity, not to mention billions of animals being slaughtered. And that would enable us to feed 10 billion people with a high consumption per capita of protein by 2050. So the reasons are extremely compelling, and it was very obvious that that's why it was all growing back then in 2019, 2020. What we had back then as perceived barriers or bottlenecks were basically having a product that tasted good, having it at scale, being produced and distributed, and then having it at the right price. Over time, as products have been developed, scale has been achieved, distribution has been built, and many trials of price parity were done, we have learned that this is not enough. There is a significant barrier when I say it's more nuanced. What the question that we were missing or lacking back then was not what it takes for someone to eat plant-based, which people would just reply taste, texture, convenience, and all price. What was lacking was the question, what does it take for someone to be willing to reduce or to substitute that protein component, which usually comes from an animal source, from their diet once or twice or a few times or in full? And that reason is not there. The nuance is there, and it's way more complex than we initially thought.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's interesting because it's a key takeaway we kept finding in our consultation with industry and in the report. It's that we have to nail this holy trio of price, taste, and texture. And, if plant-based meat manufacturers can crack that code, then we've just suddenly got boundless market share and people are going to be eating plant-based meat regularly and, there'll be no problems. But that's not where we're at. It's consumer behavior is really, really difficult. So, we had those key takeaways on the board. You kind of just kick them out the door. Is there a role for anyone else in this? Should governments or are there other players that we need help from or working to influence consumer behaviour?
Absolutely. If you look historically, there were many cases of category growth. And I think one of the most obvious examples that everyone is probably familiar with, milk consumption over time in a market like the US. It has really grown extremely fast, and it was a combination of many aspects, from very successful campaigns to support from the government financially or in terms of basically having an outtake for the products, like the government cheese and all of that, subsidies, and education campaigns. And obviously, one education is obviously the campaign like Got Milk, but we cannot ignore how important it is in terms of education to have a milk being given in every single meal, in every single school, to every single kid in a country like America. That's definitely a key piece that we'll need to drive and incentivize further in this space here.
So normalizing and making it more familiar and just more part of the everyday.
Societal, if you think about the reasons why plant-based should grow, they are societal challenges. They are not something that's challenging the normal consumer every day when they're making their food choices. They worry about taste, convenience, price, and just getting what I'm comfortable with. And obviously you have inflation, cost of living, and all of that. The reasons why we are proposing a solution, basically the problems that we're proposing a solution to are societal problems. Climate change, food security, all of those issues are not there during that moment. So having that, bridging the gap between that societal issue and a consumer decision is where governments should definitely play a much more relevant portion than they do today.
Thank you. So I have a question about blends or blended meat products, and it's been brought up a few times today already. Initially it can be quite a polarizing topic, but more and more we see more blends on the market, and I'd be keen to know, what you think about blends and if you think blends is perhaps the way forward.
Clara, it's very interesting that I've been asked that question over time. The first time I was asked that question probably was in 2020, 2021, and I found it frankly ridiculous because by then I was coming from the meat industry and I was used to seeing blends as a way to either reduce cost or to improve some, elements, for example, holding more the moisture of a sausage, for example, or reducing the cost of a nugget, or making a burger patty cheaper. So for me, blends were not something new. And the first time I heard that idea, I was like, well, but that is not what we're doing, is it? And that was myself in 2020, 2021. Over time, as I came to realize that the biggest challenge was not for me today, and the biggest challenge is far from being the technical challenge of getting the right taste, price, scale, and all of those elements. I think those are already possible today. It became clear to me that consumer behavior is the key one. So having consumers recognizing that as meat is something that the blended products can deliver. And if you are targeting, and I don't think in this case it's probably not suitable obviously for vegans or vegetarians, but if you are targeting overall reduction in animal farming, that might be one of the most effective ways. And so today, I do think that pragmatically it is a good choice, a good path.
Thank you. Just checking in, how much time do I have left? Because I think the timer is potentially wrong. Are we going till 12:30? Or am I at time? Or 12:20? Oh, so we're at time. Okay. I've got 5 minutes. Okay, sorry. We do have Slido if anyone wants to answer a question. Otherwise, ask a question on Slido to either Andre or myself, or grab me at lunch. Otherwise, I can also ask Andre a question now that I have pre-prepared. I'll quickly go, Andre. I mentioned before that industry collaboration, I think, really needs to be supercharged. What are your views on the importance of industry collaboration?
Coming from the meat industry, industry collaboration is something I was always very familiar with. While companies were fighting each other on to get space on the shelf and get share of wallet from clients, as a sector, I have always seen collaboration. And this is something I was shocked when I started my journey with plant-based meat, because I saw a lot of competition that was not constructive, going beyond the shelf. It was basically one company trying to stand out by making the other one looks worse. And that doesn't work for me. I think it has evolved a lot, but still, it has evolved from being negative to maybe neutral. But I still think the sector has to improve its ability to cooperate and develop its own agenda to then drive forward its goals and objectives with relevant stakeholders.
Well, I remember, don't turn my microphone off. I remember when we spoke earlier, Andre, you actually had a really good analogy about your time in the meat industry and how the meat industry is so good at collaboration. And it's something that I think you were saying that the plant-based meat industry really needs to learn from.
Exactly. Yeah, the meat industry has been doing this forever. They have common challenges. They need access to markets. They need countries to really be free to export from one another. And they need, to understand public health on a common ground in the set of regulations, and they do organize themselves to solve all these technical, political, and sometimes trade topics, tax benefits and whatnot. And the plant-based meat industry has been, in my view, a bit naive in the beginning. I think now everyone realizes that cooperation is the way to go, but from realizing that to actually being able to get effective collaboration, there's still a long road ahead. But we got to remember that this is a very young industry as we know it today.
Thank you. So I have one question here. I've been told I have until 12:25. Should we be lobbying for a percentage of market share for plant-based meat alternatives or plant-based alternatives towards a timeline for 2030, based on the context that we have targets for GHG reductions? I mean, but that's just me. Andre?
I think most countries have set very aggressive GHG emissions cut, within 2030, 2050, net zero. And we cannot ignore the fact that a significant contributor is the meat industry as we know it today. So from that point of view, I do think that unless there's a better choice of achieving the goals without doing this, probably governments should look at that. I don't know exactly what the tools should be, but for sure, maybe looking at the tools that were used in the very beginning of some, like I mentioned, the cheese. The government cheese in the US, the milk campaign in the schools, things that are incentivizing on the positive side, not by making it something that people have to eat whether they want it or not, but by making it better, more accessible, and incentivizing companies. So companies have a reason to serve those when they serve in like cafeterias, military, schools, menus, and all of that.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a huge change if, there was an incentive, especially in that side of institutional food service, like you say, healthcare, military, things like that. Okay, we are now at time. So I want to thank you, Andre, for joining us. And I look forward to reading your next opinion piece in Green Queen. So thank you so much, Andre.